Vince Mendoza on behalf of All Night Jazz, WUSF 89.7 FM. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today to talk about your music, how your music comes into the world, and your hopes and fears for the future of the music we love. I know you're a busy man. You've got lots of projects coming in the pipeline I want to talk about later on. But can I start with this, Vince? Sting calls, Bjork calls, Joni Mitchell, Al Jarreau, any number of the incredible contemporary artists you've worked with over your star-studded career. What's your process? How does a project start? And is it the same for each artist?
Well, the process is different, I think, for each artist, but it all really begins with the music and whether we all resonate in terms of our language, how the music is going to be presented, what the vision of the artist is going to be, and whether I think that I can be a part of that vision, and the process of that happening is different with everybody, I think. And in a perfect world, you all have this similar vision to how things should turn out. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and there's suffering down the road, but generally I have found it to be enriching to step into someone else's world and to try to find out what their vision is and to be a part of making it all happen.
And how does your world entangle itself with their world in terms of, one of the things I've noticed about your music and just the huge breadth of what you do, but whether I'm listening to you on a Joni Mitchell record, your own projects with the Metropole Orchestra, whether it's a more commercial thing, it still sounds like you. It's your personal imprint, but that never gets in the way of the artist. Talk about that. Presumably they call you because they want those huge string sonorities and everything else. How do those two worlds intertwine?
I mean, that would be the presumption, but I think if you work in the business as a writer of any sort, in the service of another artist, I think that you come to the attention of the other artist based on a project that you've done, and maybe they love some aspect of what you did or what your sound is or your approach to writing, but in the end it really has to be molded to their desires, and they may love something that I did with somebody else, but when it comes to working with them, then the question is, well, what happened to the thing that you liked before?
Oh, really? You get that. You get people say, but on that album, you did that wonderful thing with the French horns. Can I have that? Do you have those conversations?
Well, they would say, you did that wonderful thing with the French horns, but that's not really what we want in this thing. Yeah. Right. And that's fair, and it's part of my responsibility to really find out how much of my own thing they really want. Right. And how much maybe they want me to step into another stylistic point of view, or some other composer's style. Sometimes, we've had some, in the case of the Joni records, you're talking about writing in a Gil Evans style versus writing like Strauss or Brahms, or I can really only remember on that record Larry Klein telling me to just kind of do your own thing.
Oh, really? Wow.
And the rest of it was really us talking about what our stylistic frame of reference would be on a particular song, and that helped me, frankly, to decide what language I would use, or the instrumentation, and how to make something happen to paint the lyrics.
Right.
Those type of discussions helped me a lot.
On that particular record, you brought it up, so let me kind of go down that rabbit hole. On both sides now, Joni Mitchell, 1999, 2000, I think it came out. And it's probably my favorite record of all time, and I want to share with you the fact that it's a very special record for a lot of people. Back home in the UK, there's these wonderful stories of seasoned cynical session musicians who have played on everyone big trombone player, and then kind of wiping the tears away during certain moments on that record. And it does that for me and a lot of people that won a Grammy. It's an incredible artistic achievement. Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter's on it, Peter Erskine, Larry Klein, like you mentioned yourself, and Joni. Did you know it was going to be a special record when you were in the session, or did it feel like any other session?
Well, it was a special record right from the beginning. For me to be able to use an orchestra as the palette of colors, and especially to be able to use that orchestra in an amazing studio, already for me is 200 Christmases wrapped up.
Yeah, nice.
And Travelogue, of course, is another story too. To be able to dive into such amazing poetry, we got to use to record two of Joni's songs on both sides now.
Yeah,
great, and that was sort of the springboard to the next record.
Right.
And to be able to work on that music in particular was quite special, since we all know those two songs and the challenge of trying to frame it in another way. But the sessions themselves really did feel like they were going to be a special thing, but I had no idea really that it, how meaningful this recording would be to so many people. And I'm just happy that we were able to make it in a way that we really wanted to.
Yeah, right. And Vince, coming to some technicalities a little bit in terms of the volume of work you produce. I mean, there's no shortcuts to writing for orchestra, and there never will be, I hope. But it's very labor-intensive work, and the volume of your achievements. I'll read this out for our listeners. I mean, my memory's pretty good, and usually I can kind of dip into the knowledge I want to. But with you, Joni Mitchell, Sting, Melody Gardot, Elvis Costello, Bjork, Joe Zawinul, John Scofield, Randy Brecker, Robbie Williams, London Symphony Orchestra, Metropole Orchestra, WDR Big Band, Chaka Khan, Al Jarreau, Bobby McFerrin, Berlin Philharmonic, Herbie Hancock. And the list is, 6 Grammy wins, 34 Grammy nominations. That's kind of Quincy Jones territory. Are you a quick worker? Are you a disciplined worker? Do you earmark every morning from 8 till midday? Or, do you talk us about your process? Because to get this volume of rich, sophisticated orchestral writing out takes a huge amount of time. What's your process?
Right. Well, in the early days, and again, other writers will confirm this to be the case. But in the early days, when you're just starting out and you get a commission for something, you can spend every waking hour writing, and you keep going until you're done, and then you send it out and do the dance of liberation and take 2 weeks off and recharge. But then life is begins, and other things are happening, and you have a family, you have other work responsibilities. In my case, I started conducting work after meeting up with the radio orchestras in Europe, and I started working with the Metropole Orchestra quite regularly as the chief. So I had other things that took the writing time away, and spent most of my time on an airplane or on the podium or answering emails. So then the writing time contracted quite a bit, and then it really started taking me quite a long time to finish a project or even a piece of music. It's difficult. So I don't have that type of discipline to wake up at 4 a.m. and go into my writing shack in the back of my 200-acre property and listen to the birds. You
don't?
I don't have a 200-acre property.
What? This is a huge letdown for all of us.
So you have to you find the time to work, and I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to be doing, and I talk about that with my students a lot too. You think about what the process is going to be, and when you sit down to write, then you really know what you're going to be attacking in that particular session.
You have so when the first pen and manuscript paper, you've got a reasonably good idea of the sort of piece or movement or arrangement or composition. You know that it's going to be slow. It's going to feature string quartet and flugel. I mean, whatever it might be. You say it's very rarely blank canvas. Oh, I wonder where my hands fall, kind of thing. You've thought about it a lot first.
I would do that when I'm composing. That I'll spend a fair amount of time experimenting, improvising, writing, scribbling, without really thinking about what it's going to be, because I think that editorial process sometimes could shut down the creativity, and so I like to dance around a little bit, and even when I'm writing arrangements for songs for people, there's a certain amount of time for experimentation, because maybe you'll find some ideas that can frame the poetry in a way that you wouldn't normally think if we're thinking, okay, I'm going to sit down and it's going to be slow and it's going to be for clarinet and it's going to be, the too many parameters tend to shut down those feelings. But then after a while, you have to make those decisions about what you've improvised and what is usable and what is appropriate and what the instrumentation could be, color, and all the rest of it.
And do you handwrite, and then do you put it into a notational program yourself, or you have someone to help do that for you?
I do both. Primarily, if I'm scoring something on, for orchestra now, I'll work directly onto the software. It took me a while to
really
get to that point where I felt a direct connection between what I'm thinking and what I'm, entering. And still, I'm not fast enough with the data entry to be able to think of something and write it so quickly. And if that's the case, then I'll write it quickly in pen and then put it in. But generally, I'll work directly with the software now.
Amazing, gosh. Vince, let's go back a bit. I read that you studied, or you certainly played trumpet and guitar in high school. And then it occurred to me that the direction your career's gone in, was that did you always want to be a writer, or was it that your guitar playing wasn't quite good enough, or you didn't enjoy guitar playing? I know you love performing because I see you conduct and you're a very expressive conductor. So there's nothing along those lines, but did you always want to write and not play? Was that always part of you as a kid?
Well, I grew up listening to the radio when I was a kid, and in those days, not FM radio, it was AM radio, and the New York stations would play pop music and R&B, and hearing in those days it was, Aretha and Motown and, the Four Tops, and then it was Philadelphia and the Spinners and the OJs.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
The Philadelphia music was copiously orchestrated, and
of course.
And that's when I really started dreaming that I wanted to be in the studio with the orchestra, recording that music.
Right.
And so, from a very young age, I really thought about orchestras and instruments and how all of that fits in with the groove. So when I wrote my own music, it was really through that filter. And so as I grew up and started to get, take lessons and get more informed and study music and listen to more recordings and scores and all of that, that beginning part of when the light went on, hearing the Philadelphia sound, that beginning part never left, and it's still there.
Oh, that's so lovely, and that's really. I never thought of that Philly sound, which had big productions and how, as soon as you said that, I'm hearing everything you've done. I can see how it's sort of traceable back in some way to that.
Right.
And so therefore, I think I might know half the answer to this then. There's a precedent for composers, arrangers such as yourself, certainly through history. I mean, Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, Gil Evans, Maria Schneider, they form their own band. They have their own orchestra, their own kind of vessel for their output. And your career alternates between other people's projects and your own, and you go back and forth between the two. And you never felt tempted to form a band, and that was never an ambition then.
Well, I did have when I was a college student and my beginnings of living in LA. I did have a big band, and it was a great way to meet musicians, and we played at some of the LA jazz clubs, and fairly steadily was able to rely on having gigs. But then I realized maybe 2 years into the operation that I would never make any money as a musician if I continued to try to keep this band together, because it took so much time and effort. And the musicians were all working studio musicians, and I was constantly having to deal with substitutes and getting people's phone numbers and making phone calls, and I just didn't want to have to deal with that anymore. And I'm sure that the band leaders out there, Maria included, would agree that it's a very time-consuming operation. And I'm writing and paying the rent than keeping this band together to play at the jazz club.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I can see what you mean. And Vince, something about your style. Again, I was so excited to talk to you and really want our all-night jazz listeners to kind of try and get an insight into your world and your motivation, your techniques. And your music manages to be both simple and complex at the same time to my ears, in the sense that it's a very rich, often expansive contrapuntal language, and if you actually analyze it and see it on paper, there's an awful lot going on. But I always get the sense with your music, and this is what elevates it to the world of greatness, really, is that your intentions are very clear. Like the narrative, the emotion is always really, really clear. And you might not be able to answer this because it might be something that comes natural to you, but can you talk about how you work in that sense, that there's maybe 7 independent lines, but the overall effect for my mum, who doesn't know the first thing about music, is she feels, tingles and goosebumps and all that kind of thing. Can you talk about the mixture of simplicity and complexity and how it enters into your thinking?
Right. These days I tend to approach pretty much everything in terms of the writing from the standpoint of shape and lyricism and linear expression.
Right.
And so, when we're writing for a string quartet or writing for a 100-piece orchestra, that idea of linear thought, writing a line, a melody, and the support of that melody would be another melody, and the chords that are being played with the melody also have some sort of a linear quality to it. And I think that we all feel that. And when I'm speaking to my students about writing in a linear fashion for orchestral musicians, the bottom line is that a human being is going to play this part. And if you want them to be expressive, then write them an expressive part, and you'll benefit 100 times over because of that. And so you can hear it in a performance when musicians are playing parts that are conceived in a linear manner, that they were all leaning into the part and playing expressively, and it comes out in the music. So I can't discount the importance of this lyricism in all of my projects.
That's, you've made sense of your world for me, really, by, I think in that answer you said the word linear or lyrical about 6 times. And again, I'm hearing your music, and even the second bassoon line is considered, it won't be the most important melody, but it will be melodic in its own, have its own integrity and everything else. And that's amazing, man. And so,
rights too, there's
sorry?
they have the second bassoon player has a right to have a good part and to be.
Second bassoon players are people too. Yeah,
That's right.
Talk about within that context, and again, something you just do seemingly effortlessly, but there's obviously a huge amount of effort. But electroacoustic music and electronics and synths and in an acoustic setting, particularly maybe talk about the Metropole Orchestra. But again, it can be a very crude thing if it's not handled well, and we've all heard examples of that. And I was listening to some of your early records, going back to start Instructions Inside and Start Here, and
right.
And you know, it's their late 80s, early 90s, and the production values, and they're gorgeous records. The production values are slightly more coming out of that 80s sound, and there's some synth programming and drum programming, but it just sounds really organic. And can you talk about your approach to incorporating electronic instruments?
Well, those two records, Start Here and Instructions Inside, the process was sort of the same as it would have been if they were orchestral records, that everything was written out ahead of time. And strangely enough, this seems wild by our 21st century standards, but the recordings were made in the reverse of the way a lot of recordings were made with synths, that the synthesizers were played in from, read from the parts and programmed by Judd Miller with particular sounds and colors that I wanted to have. And we recorded those synth parts onto the multi-track tape, in those days the 2-inch tape, and shipped the tapes to New York, and the band, the musicians played to the tapes.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
Huh. They were actually playing to the pre-written synth tracks. And so the improvisations and all of that were really done in the studio after the synth parts were conceived and programmed.
So Peter Erskine's playing to your synth drum track in his can.
That piece, Tough Crowd, with the fake tablas.
Yeah. I was looking for the tabla player, and then it's like,
yeah. He played to those parts. But generally, on the other pieces that didn't have any drum programming, he played to clicks, and whatever parts that I had pre-written were already there. And in those days, I think that synth parts tend to be looked on as what they call a sweetener, that just to kind of thicken up the texture after the fact. But what I saw is that I wanted the synths to be more of an integral part of what the musicians were feeling and listening to when they were improvising. And so I wanted to put them on before. And that means that we sent I think it was 10 or 20 reels of 2-inch tape by mail, or Federal Express or Express Mail or whatever it was called at the time in 1990, to New York for the recording. Now we would, I would have a disk drive in my pocket with everything on it, right?
Yeah. And the Metropole Orchestra, I guess I'm seeing this from a couple of points of view. We're in this time of this COVID-19 pandemic, which is, I want your thoughts on a lot of the world you work in is orchestral, both recording and in live performance. And, orchestras are having a very hard time, as are many people. And the Metropole Orchestra is one of those pop jazz orchestras that has a full string section, a full wind, but also, if required, there'll be 2 synth players or electric guitar and whatever you require. Are you hearing from your orchestras? What kind of shape are they in? Are they concerned? Are you concerned? Where are we at with all that? And your current projects as well?
Well, everybody is concerned, of course, and with regard to the Metropole, they've always had a bad business model. So, so the fact that we're piling on a worldwide pandemic that shuts down live concerts is just uh, another thing that they have to consider, and of course they hadn't been working, and the summer festivals were toasted, and the same problem that all of our dear freelance musicians all over the world are dealing with, a horrible um, problem of not being able to play, just financially and spiritually to play in front of an audience. I'll miss that. Now, the Metropole is starting to do recording projects and recording by section, and some things that we were doing in London for Melody Gardot's record in the summertime, recording section by section in London, and the WDR, the HR band, the NDR, they're all the German radio bands have started up, and they of course have a mandate to provide programming to the radio.
Right.
So they have to keep recording, and they have to keep making some concerts in a.
You mean because they're a radio orchestra, right? So there's a contractual obligation. Yeah. So it's a or whatever. Yeah.
Metropole is a freelance orchestra now on arts subsidy, and of course you know what that means. That the road is considerably more bumpy, and so they're trying to make the best that they can to record new projects, and try to get on the stage as much as possible. They have a few concerts they were streaming, and of course the business model for streaming is not a huge revenue builder. So I think that the important part is to keep present for their audience, and so they're trying to do that as much as they can.
Yeah, and I think you've been really crucial in. I mean, the orchestra can be as hip and as current as we want to make it, but it is an old institution. I mean, it just is. Joseph Haydn kind of developed it to what it is right now, and then it was expanded. And but somehow in your writing bits and your projects, you do manage to make it sound really, really hip and current. I could play it to a 20-year-old student who's grown up on, I don't know, Beyonce for sake of an argument, and they would resonate with the music. And is that groove? Is that percussion? How do you do that?
Well, the Metropole in a certain way is the perfect musical manifestation of those dreams that started with the Philly sound. Have the orchestra and they have the groove, and so with the 20 years that I've been involved with them, and working with them and talking about styles and executing grooves and counting and rhythms and the things that some rhythm musicians take for granted and are very difficult for orchestral musicians. The Metropole really has that discipline down, and so when we get a hold of a project that is rhythmically vital, being able to orchestrate it in a way that has those colors is part of their recipe, and I'm happy to be a part of what they've been doing all of these years.
Being that most of these grooves that we're talking about, and I mean, come from where we are right now. You're in California, I'm in Florida. These are American grooves. They're certainly not Dutch grooves. Why doesn't America have a Metropole Orchestra? I mean, there's Jazz at Lincoln Center, there's some wonderful orchestras, but why doesn't it have a full-size contemporary pop jazz orchestra?
Well, I think it's a budgetary thing. I think LA had one for a little while called the American Composers Orchestra. There's one in New York that meets once in a while for composers. It's not. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, a jazz orchestra, but I know that the one in LA that Jack Elliott ran for many years was a very expensive orchestra to keep going. Yeah. The concerts were expensive, and in order to really have them, you'd have to have some heavy hitter soloists to bring the audience in. But then that would really preclude the orchestra from playing new music that costs money to commission, and it's a vicious circle. And Mitch Glickman has an orchestra out here that does a similar thing, but it's nowhere near being the full-time dedicated orchestra with their own facility that the Metropole has. But they were born out of the radio system, and they spent the better part of 75 years serving the radio stations of the Netherlands in all different styles and formats. So that really sort of kept the lights on for them. And over the last 10 years, they've been an arts institution, leaving the radio system, and so now they're working hard to keep their own lights on.
Oh, right. I didn't realize that. But you're right. I mean, Toscanini, some of the recordings from the 40s into the 50s, that was the NBC Symphony Orchestra, which became. So that did exist here in the States, like an ensemble connected to a radio station and connected with its own integral funding.
Right, and you, to a certain extent, you could see the Tonight Show, Jack and Steve Allen and Carson, of course, and that was also an NBC orchestra, and the film studios also had staff orchestras for many years. But it wasn't that the film studios were, they didn't have a concert series, and they didn't go on the road, and they didn't play jazz festivals, and they were dedicated to playing film scores. And so this is a very unique orchestra, the Metropole, and to be able to keep an orchestra like this as a freelance group, playing and recording and all that is a huge undertaking, and it does need an arts community and a community that says, okay, we believe that there should be an orchestra like this because there's nothing like this in the world, and you're amazing, world class, and people flock to this orchestra to work with them. To be valued by your community is a very special thing, and I don't think that our country, the U.S., values groups like that to the extent that they want to say, okay, we will support you. I think that they call it in the European circles, they call it the American model. American model is you're on your own, buddy.
Yeah. And some European thing, which is, despite the fact that we know this makes no financial sense, and will be an unsuccessful financial model purely on financial terms, we think it has a value which is beyond that to a community, a society, an artistic community, which we're going to put a price on as well, and say, no, this is worth fighting for. Yeah.
And I think Lincoln Center began like that. They believed in the music, and they believed that jazz was one of the most important art forms to come out of the United States, and we need to value it. And they found the funding to support an organization like that in New York. And so hats off to Lincoln Center and the band, and they've done great work and outreach and education and all of that. I think it should happen more
So,
in more in the
forgive my
States.
ignorance, but is Lincoln Center and the orchestra and everything that Winton does, that you saying that does have some state funding? Because I don't know.
Not, no. Well, they probably have some state funding, but from what I understand, I think it's a donor operated organization with a series that gives concerts, and people go to concerts, and it keeps afloat that way. But I don't think it's not primarily a government sponsored organization, and I don't really know of any in the States. Maybe your listeners can chime in.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, there isn't a full-time orchestra being funded by the government as we see it.
But maybe this pandemic will be a turning point, and people will realize. I was listening to an interview on NPR recently, actually on our station, and it was a guy was making a point that he was offended that art is not considered an essential service, and I never really thought of it that way. That kind of essential services, and we're heralding quite rightly doctors and nurses and all these wonderful people. But he was just kind of saying he was offended that an orchestra isn't, or an art gallery or a museum or a cinema trip is not seen as essential. And I thought, oh yeah. And there'll be parts of Europe where that conversation will be familiar, but certainly here it would seem to be an entirely alien thing. Vince, how do we make the case that what we do really matters? Are you more mindful of that now? Does that occupy your thoughts?
Well, it does. It occupies my thoughts every day, and you also, when you put the pencil on the paper, you wonder, whether what you're doing is really having an impact. And maybe I should go and help build a sidewalk on the other side of town because I know how terrible the sidewalks are. But on the other hand, you have to think about what kind of fabric you see going through the culture of your country, and how you envision the people of your country and what they think is important. And we had a similar discussions in the Netherlands when the Metropole's future was gravely in doubt. That after they were kicked out of the radio system, that they wouldn't survive anymore. But then the big question that was asked was, what kind of a cultural landscape do you really want in your country? And I think that in our country, we have to ask that same question. And what do you think is important? And how about the kind of education that young children have in the arts and music to teach them that the arts are an important part of how we live. The arts are a reflection of our souls, of our life, of our community. And if you don't teach people that's the case, then when you are older and you have money to spend, then what you see as an important outlet for your money. And so that process happens very early on, and it's hard to tell someone who's a full-fledged adult in the work world with a family that art and culture is important. But if you've always believed that from day one, then it's not a hard sell.
Yeah, but like you say, if you're a fully fledged adult and you've never seen a terrific big band, a world-class symphony orchestra, in full flow, then you've got no reference point for that. Do your students and the generation you work with, I know you teach at USC and that's really important to you, and you're teaching the next generation of people who are in this world that we're in. Are these conversations that they're having amongst themselves, do you think? Are they thinking of these things?
Those are conversations that I force upon them.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah, I think it should be part of the artist's consciousness that you're really wondering, where you are in your community and who's listening and what how your music can reflect the times. And we were watching videos of Nina Simone saying the exact same thing 50 years ago. Yeah. And how does an artist reflect the times, and how does the community value the people that give them this art? And by the way, if you're talking about the full-fledged adult who goes to the movies or turns on the television, or hears a film score on Netflix, or flips through his Instagram and hears music, or has to find a DJ or a wedding band for their wedding, or hears somebody play for them in a restaurant. This stuff doesn't come out of thin air. There are human beings playing this music for them. Yeah. They're all citizens of this country and part of the community.
Yeah.
It's all the same combination of things.
I want to talk about this is your latest project with Luciana Souza. Is it Sosa or Souza?
Souza.
Sorry. Which is absolutely beautiful. I've been enjoying that a huge amount. What have you got in the pipeline, Vince, moving forward in terms of projects that you're currently working on, projected for next year?
Well, we have a few things. I just finished the Melody Gardot recording, the new one that's probably out imminently. But the one that I'm quite excited about now is my orchestral symphonic record that's called Freedom Over Everything, and it's going to probably be out in January or February on Modern Recordings, BMG. And it began as a commission for my concerto for orchestra with the Czech National Symphony, and we recorded part of it. It was written in 2016 around our last election cycle, and the temperature of the country around that time seemed to be tumultuous, to say the least. At that time, of course, we had no idea what was going to be happening in our country now, and so the piece is really about that arc of the noise and understanding that should come out of protest and dialogue, and
yes.
and this, what Dr. King called the arc of the moral universe, bending toward justice. And so that's what the concerto really is about. And so the last part of the concerto has Black Thought rapping, and the concerto features Antonio Sanchez and Derek Hodge.
Wow.
And another piece that is on the recording is a setting of Rilke's a section of the Book of Hours from Rilke that's beautifully sung by Julia Bullock, who's a up and coming almost superstar American soprano. She's a superstar for me.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Soprano. There's loads. I want to pick it out because there's some of my ignorance. You said featuring Black Thought. Is that a group, or is that a concept, like actual words of?
Black Thought is the rapper from the Roots.
Okay, yeah, that's my ignorance.
Yeah, and you can hear him on the Jimmy Fallon show.
Right,
in the Roots, and he wrote this amazing rap and performed in the last movement of the concerto.
That's amazing. And so is this? Gosh, I'm just getting so excited. I've got 5,000 questions coming in right now. So it's orchestral. Is it orchestral like you did with Epiphany, where you feature a rhythm section, the featured soloists, plus a rapper? Is that the context?
Well, the concerto has 5 movements, And it really began as a way to feature the some members of the orchestra in virtuosic parts, and then it grew.
Is it the Czech orchestra or no?
It's the Czech National Symphony.
It is, okay, right.
I've been working with them for several years now.
Right.
So I asked Antonio Sanchez to be a part of the program, so a part of the concerto. So he's playing on quite a bit of it. Compared to Epiphany, I would say that there's more of a concentration on the writing and of the orchestral parts, and really more of a programmatic aspect to the whole record of this moral arc that I'm talking about. And the Rilke is somewhat of a salve to the tumult of the concerto. And then the final piece on the record is my trumpet concertino called New York Stories, that has sort of an homage to the streets of New York. And
who's playing trumpet?
The trumpet player is Jan Hassenorl, Czech trumpet player.
Okay. This brings together everything we've been talking about in terms of trying. I mean, I said to you 5 minutes ago, how do we make what we do relevant? And you've just kind of answered it really beautifully. I mean, I can't wait to hear this record. It sounds, it's symphonic more than jazz. I mean, will jazz listeners, our audience on All Night Jazz, are the jazz references to it, or is it really quite, kind of through composed symphonic writing?
It's probably as confusing stylistically as Epiphany was in that regard. That there's a lot of jazz elements in it.
Yeah.
But it really has more of a concentration on the narrative of the story and how I'm using the orchestral colors and the players of the orchestra to tell the story.
I'm so excited to hear that. It's coming out in January.
I think in January, yeah.
Okay. And please make sure we get a copy at the radio station, and I'll be sure to push that. And was there going to be live performances of this? Is that still something to aim for at some point?
I did hear some rumblings about a date at Carnegie Hall. So I'm ready. I'm ready for that. And but there are some decisions that have to be made about whether Carnegie Hall is going to be open.
Yeah.
We're talking about some dates in 22 for the orchestra there, and I think that I'm going to try to program the Rilke piece called "To the Edge of Longing" with a couple of orchestras in the States.
Yeah.
And it obviously it's a difficult concerto to program because you need to have a rhythm section but it's not impossible, and quite a few orchestras in the States now are incorporating these elements.
Right. Yeah, in terms of to augment the standard orchestra. Yeah. That's incredibly exciting. My gosh, I wish you tons and tons of luck with that. Anything else you can tell us about in terms of programming and projects? And
this last week, we finished the orchestral tracking for a Metropole Orchestra recording of Mendoza music, and it came about from a smaller project that we did over the summer of recording a couple of my pieces that I wrote for the Metropole over the last 20-something years. I've been involved with them, and it came out so beautifully, and there was such enthusiasm to go into the studio and play this music that we decided to make an entire project out of it. So we found the 9 hits from the last 26 years that I wrote for the orchestra, and we made this incredible recording. The orchestra sounds amazing.
But what if the hits were with Al Jarreau, who obviously is sailing along with us, so these were hits that the orchestra did of just your music?
That's right.
Right, okay. Yeah. So not collaborations.
Music. Right. Jazz Mendoza music. But we have some surprise guests coming in to play and sing. And
In any other world, this would be Vince Mendoza's greatest hits, but I'm not going to do that. I mean,
rather autobiographical.
Sorry?
It's rather autobiographical.
Right.
The early music that I wrote for them when we were just beginning, and that the orchestra really sort of owns in a way, that they play it so beautifully that it was sort of the beginning of our musical relationship, and how they were able to shape my thoughts as a composer.
Wow. That's beautiful, Vince. You've informed each other. It wasn't you just giving an orchestra notes. It was them showing what they could do, and then that feeding back into what your output is. Yeah. Vince, I know you're a busy man, and I need to wrap up, but I do want to ask this of everyone. I want a handful of jazz solos or jazz compositions or particular recordings that you love, that always make you smile, and maybe a couple of things that you're listening to now with your ear to the ground that you've just started to keep an eye on that you really like.
Oh, wow. Well, for it just, keeping it in the jazz realm, I mean, in my pantheon of recordings, at the very, very beginning, and I bring this record up quite often, but I grew up listening to Henry Mancini's music quite often, and there's this one recording called Mancini 67.
Okay.
And it's a big band recording, but it has the horns in it, and when you look at the cast of characters on the record, Jack Sheldon in particular, who was a hero of mine, it made me want to play the trumpet in those days, and I still go back and listen to that record, and the way that he writes, writes for the horns and the brass in particular, was so influential to the way that I write my music even now.
Wow.
Then there would be, of course, Klaus Ogerman and the Gate of Dreams record, and the Cityscape record.
Brecker, yeah.
Right, but the way that Klaus wrote for the Jobim records, and so that the recording, the Machita Pere recording, the original one of Jobim and Dori Caime's orchestrations along with Klaus on that record influenced the stuff that we recorded with Luciana and the WDR band.
Yeah.
And then of course there's Thad Jones, the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra, the Potpourri record for me, on the top of the list of influential recordings for me. Bob Brookmeyer's recording with the Vanguard Orchestra, called "Make Me Smile," the live recording of the band there. Those are for me the ones that really made the light go on, and Gil Evans, the Sketches of Spain, the Miles for the Live at the Plug Nickel. If your listeners out there don't know that one, you should race out, run to the record store.
I want to play that on my next show. I'm actually going to, as soon as I get off with you, I'm going to talk to my head of jazz program and see if we can get some of these out for my next show. That would be great.
I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out, but the contemporary things that I'm listening to are sort of all over the place, as I'm always looking for things for my students and different settings. But I'm starting to I have been listening quite a bit to Isaac Hayes and Axelrod's music from the 70s, and there's so many amazing orchestrations.
Yeah, right.
Those records, and a lot of them are quite unusual in their choices of instruments and the way that they write for them. But everything just fits perfectly with the vibe, and I love listening to that.
Yeah.
And that's taking up a lot of my brain space these days.
I think that's one of the things that makes you special, Vince, is just from listening to you talk and knowing you a bit and your music, is that you've got an ear. I mean, that Philly sound you're talking about, contemporary, you've got your ear to the contemporary pulse, but you know about Stravinsky and Hindemith and
Right.
Richard Strauss. And I think that's, in a nutshell, probably makes you the artist you are in that sense, really.
Well, everything informs our work and whatever has chosen us to go, inside of our imagination. That's what makes it so beautiful, that everybody has a different frame of reference and things that influence our writing.
Yeah. Vince Mendoza, on behalf of All Night Jazz, WUSF 89.7 FM, we're so grateful for you to spend an hour with us sharing your inspirations and thoughts and how this amazing music comes into the world and touches so many people. So thank you for the music and thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
It's great to see you again. Congratulations on your show. You're doing a beautiful job. And greetings to all your listeners, and we'll catch you the next time.